My father called my wedding medals fake in front of 50 guests and demanded I remove them. My husband caught his hand mid-swing, looked him in the eyes, and said 6 words that made my father collapse on the reception floor. The earring bounced twice before it stopped. I remember that detail with the specific clarity that comes from moments where your nervous system decides that everything happening right now needs to be recorded exactly. The small gold loop, a gift from Ryan's mother, worn because she'd asked me to and because I loved her for asking, hit the hardwood floor of the reception hall and bounced twice and came to rest near the leg of a chair. My cheek was still registering what had happened. Not pain yet. That came a half second later, the way pain always does when the impact is fast enough. First, there was just the sound, crack, and the sensation of my head snapping sideways, and the sudden ringing, and then I was aware of the room. 50 people. Every one of them was looking at my father. I turned back slowly. Frank Calloway stood 3 feet from me in the dress shirt my mother had bought him for this occasion, his hand still elevated in the space where it had been before he'd swung it, and his face had gone the specific red that comes after the fact rather than before. Not the red of anger building, but the red of someone who has done something and is now in the first moments of processing what they've done. His hand started rising again. It never finished. Ryan's hand closed around my father's wrist with the quiet certainty of someone who has trained for years to move precisely in moments when other people are moving badly. No raised voice, no threat, no performance of authority, just the controlled professional grip of a man who has spent a career making consequential decisions in very small windows of time and who has decided in this one exactly what is required. Frank, Ryan said. One word. Quiet enough that only the 3 of us and the 6 people closest to us heard it clearly. My father tried to pull his arm back. Ryan didn't tighten his grip. He simply maintained it. The distinction matters because tightening would have been force and maintaining was just fact. And the fact was that the arm was not going to finish its motion. The silence in that reception hall had a texture I have not experienced before or since. 50 people collectively holding something that wasn't breath exactly, but was the nearest equivalent. The suspended state of witnesses who understand that what they are watching is real and that how it resolves will matter. Then Ryan looked directly into my father's eyes and he said 6 words. She saved 12 men that day. Nothing more, nothing less. My father's face did something I had never seen it do in 32 years. The anger left it, not gradually, not in stages, but the way water leaves a glass when the glass tips past the point of holding. His eyes went wide, his mouth opened slightly, and then something moved behind his expression that was not embarrassment and not shame. It was fear and recognition. He understood exactly what those words meant. The color left his face like a tide going out, visibly, completely, all at once. His knees moved. He swayed once, twice, then he went down. Let me start from the beginning, because this story does not make sense without the beginning, and because the beginning is where you find the thing that explains everything else. My name is Emily Calloway. I am 34 years old. I served 11 years as an Army helicopter pilot, UH-60 Black Hawk, primarily, with qualifications that I earned through a process that does not permit shortcuts and does not respond to family connections or personal charm or any variable other than demonstrated competence in the air. I flew multiple deployments. I was decorated through official military channels. I was also, for 32 years, the daughter my father could not quite see. Frank Calloway is 61. He spent 4 years in the Army in the 1980s. Stateside service, support roles, honorable discharge, nothing shameful, nothing remarkable. He came home from that service and spent the next 30 years building a version of himself that was larger than the service he'd actually done, not in small ways. In elaborate, detailed, consistently maintained ways. Stories of combat he had not seen, missions he had not been part of, a record of heroism that existed entirely in the telling and nowhere in any document. He was very good at it. People who haven't spent time around military service often don't know the specific vocabulary of it, the institutional language, the texture of how people who have done things describe those things. My father had learned that vocabulary. He used it correctly. His stories had the right details in the right places. I know this because I grew up believing them. I know they were false because Ryan found the documents. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana, in a house where my father's military stories were the primary narrative of who we were as a family. They were the things he told at dinner parties, at his brother's cookouts, at the VFW chapter where he was a respected member and occasional speaker. He wore his discharge with the authority of a man whose service meant something specific, and the people around him took him at his word, because that is what you do when someone describes their own experience. I enlisted at 18. I did not do this to impress him. I want to be clear about that, because the simpler version of this story, daughter enlists to earn absent father's approval, is not what happened. I enlisted because I had wanted to fly since I was 9 years old, and because the Army offered me a path to flight school, and because I am the kind of person who, when she wants something, goes directly toward it rather than waiting for circumstances to arrange themselves. My father's reaction, when I told him, was not pride. "You'll wash out," he said. "Flight school is not for people who haven't been through real training first." I had been through ROTC for 4 years. I had a fitness level that my PT instructor described, in the careful language of someone who doesn't want to make the other candidates feel bad, as exceptional. I was 22 years old and I had already demonstrated to every institutional authority that had evaluated me that I was not going to wash out. I did not wash out. I graduated flight school. I deployed. I came back. I deployed again. I accumulated the record of a pilot who shows up for difficult things and does them well, which is not a complicated thing to describe, but is an extremely difficult thing to be, day after day, in conditions that test every version of you simultaneously. My father attended my commissioning. He stood in the right places and shook the right hands and accepted the compliments of my commanding officers with the practiced ease of a man who is comfortable in military settings, which he was, because he had been performing comfort in military settings for 30 years. He never once said he was proud of me, not at my commissioning, not after my first deployment, not after my second, not when the decorations came, awarded through official channels, documented in my service record, each one representing something specific that had been evaluated by people whose job was to evaluate such things accurately. He found other things to say. The medals were routine, the deployments were support roles, the commendations were political. He said these things without evidence, without documentation, without any basis except the need to reduce what I had done to a size that fit beneath what he had claimed to do. I stopped expecting otherwise around my third deployment. That is not a sad sentence, or not only a sad sentence. There is a specific freedom in stopping the expectation of something you have spent years pursuing. The energy you had been pouring into the pursuit becomes available for other things. I poured it into flying, into my crew, into the work. I met Ryan at Fort Campbell in 2017. He was visiting a colleague, Navy, different branch, the kind of professional crossover that happens when people operate in adjacent worlds. He was introduced to me at a squadron dinner as someone who knows what he's doing, which in the particular economy of military social introductions is a significant endorsement. We talked for 3 hours. He asked questions about flying that demonstrated he had actually thought about flying, which is rarer than you might expect. Ryan Calloway, now my husband, formerly Chief Petty Officer Ryan Calloway, United States Navy, who spent 11 years in special operations before medically separating due to an injury sustained during a training exercise that he describes as inconvenient, and that anyone who knows him describes as considerably more than inconvenient, is the steadiest person I have ever known. Not in the passive sense of steadiness, not in the sense of someone who doesn't move. In the active sense, the steadiness that is chosen, maintained, and deployed at precisely the moments when the alternative would be easier. He asked me to marry him 11 months after we met, in the kitchen of my apartment in Clarksville, on a Tuesday evening while I was making pasta, and he was reading a report on the counter. He didn't have a ring. He'd been planning to, he told me later. But then he was sitting there reading, and I was cooking, and it felt like the right moment, and he was not a man who argued with right moments. I said yes before he finished the sentence. The question of the uniform came up 4 months before the wedding. I had been out of active service for a year by then, medically transitioned out following a knee injury, the accumulation of years in the aircraft seat, and several instances of impact that my body had managed, and then eventually, at 32, declined to manage anymore. I was working as a civilian flight instructor and consulting for a defense contractor on a part-time basis. I wore my flight suits to work and my civilian clothes everywhere else. The wedding dress had been purchased, a beautiful thing that I had tried on with Ryan's mother Patricia in a shop in Nashville, and that I had immediately understood was not right, not for reasons of aesthetics, but because I kept thinking about the uniform hanging in my closet and feeling like I was wearing the wrong thing. I didn't say this out loud immediately. I thought about it for a week. Then I told Ryan. He put down whatever he was reading and looked at me with the full attention he gives things that he has decided are worth full attention. "You want to wear your dress uniform," he said. "I think so. I don't know if people will think it's Emily." He said it simply, not as an interruption, but as a return to what mattered. "You earned every piece of that uniform. Wear it proudly." I wore it. My father called the week before the wedding. Routine call, logistics, arrival time, the name of the hotel where his side of the family was staying. At the end of the call, almost as an afterthought, "I heard you're wearing your uniform?" "Yes," I said. A pause. "Is that necessary?" "It's my wedding," I said. "People will think you're trying to make a statement." "I'm not trying to make a statement. I'm wearing my uniform." Another pause. "Fine," he said, not with acceptance, with the specific intonation of someone who has registered an objection for the record and is reserving the right to return to it. He returned to it. The reception was at the Carnton Estate in Franklin, Tennessee, an antebellum property with a long history that Ryan and I had chosen because of the grounds, the light in the late afternoon, and because Patricia had cried when she saw it, and we considered that decisive. October. The kind of Tennessee fall afternoon that makes you understand why people write songs about Tennessee fall afternoons. The ceremony had been everything we wanted. Small, intentional, presided over by a Navy chaplain who had known Ryan for years, and who had the specific gift of saying true things without making them sound rehearsed. Ryan's family was warm and present. My mother stood in the front row and cried in the generous, uncomplicated way of someone who is genuinely happy. My father was there. He wore the dress shirt my mother had bought him. He sat through the ceremony with the contained posture of a man who had decided to be appropriate, which is the best version of him in public settings. The reception moved into the golden hour. String quartet, caterers with trays of things Ryan and I had both agreed were better than the alternatives. Tables of people who loved us in various configurations of the word. Veterans came to talk to me, not in a formal way, the way they do when they recognize a uniform, when they want to acknowledge the person wearing it. A retired Marine named Captain Jerry Gerald Holt, 26 years of service, who shook my hand at the bar and said, "Black Hawk?" And I said, "Yes, sir," and we had 4 minutes of the specific conversation that pilots have with pilots. A retired Army sergeant named David Reyes, who had served in Afghanistan, and who thanked me with the sincerity of someone who means it rather than performing it. I watched my father watch these interactions from across the room. I had been watching him watch them for an hour. The expression on his face had been darkening in increments, not dramatically, not in a way that the room could have read, but in a way I had been reading my entire life and knew with the precision of long exposure. Each handshake, each thank you, each moment of recognition from a veteran who saw what the uniform represented, each one darkened him a degree more. I was talking to Sergeant Reyes when I heard the music stop. I turned. My father was standing 4 feet behind me. The string quartet had seen him approaching and had, with the instinct of people who feel the temperature of a room for a living, gone quiet. "Don't tell me," he said, "that you're actually wearing those things." 50 people turned. I have thought about the specific quality of that moment many times. The precise feeling of standing in a room full of people who love you, on the most significant day of your adult life, while your father's voice carries across the sudden silence toward you. It was not a new feeling exactly. It was a familiar feeling in an unfamiliar setting, which is sometimes worse. "Dad," I said. My voice was even. "Please don't do this today." "Oh, I'm doing this," he said. He stepped closer. His eyes went to my chest, to the medals on my uniform, each one representing something specific, awarded through official military channels by people whose job was to award them correctly. "Those are attention-seeking decorations." His voice had risen, not shouting, projecting, the way someone projects when they want a room to hear. "People have been congratulating you all afternoon like you're some kind of hero." Quick pause. If you want more stories like this in better quality, my Spotify's linked in the description. I thought about the friends whose names are on memorial walls. I thought about the specific things those medals represented, the things they do not describe in the citations because the citations are institutional, and some things are not institutional. "Every medal on this uniform," I said, "was awarded through official military channels." He snorted. Sure they were. The retired Marine, Captain Holt, had moved to my left. He was looking at my father with the expression of a man who has decided he is not going to intervene yet, but is positioned to. "Take them off," my father said. I stared at him. "What?" "The medals. Take them off." There was a sound in the room. Not quite a gasp, more like a collective intake that didn't fully complete itself, the sound of 50 people processing something. I straightened my shoulders. The posture was not a decision exactly. It was the posture that comes when you have been trained to stand a certain way, and your body understands that this is the moment for that posture. "No," I said. His face went red. No, I'm not removing them." For 1 second, exactly 1 second, I counted it without meaning to, the way trained pilots count things without meaning to. Nobody moved. Then his hand came up. Crack. The pain arrived on the half-second delay, and my head had already moved sideways by the time I felt it, and I heard something small hit the floor twice before it stopped, and I knew what it was before I looked. The gold loop that Ryan's mother had given me, lying near the leg of a chair. I turned back. My father's hand was still in the space where it had been. He was looking at me with an expression I had not seen on his face before. Not anger anymore exactly. Something beyond anger. Something that anger becomes when it has outrun the part of the person that governs it. His hand started rising again. Ryan's hand closed around his wrist. I want to tell you about Ryan's 6 words, because those words are the center of this story, and they require context to carry their full weight. She saved 12 men that day. Ryan had never told me he planned to say them. He had not asked my permission. He had not discussed it. He had simply held my father's wrist in a grip that would not tighten and would not release. And he had looked directly into Frank Calloway's eyes, and he had spoken 6 words with the level certainty of someone who has chosen them carefully and knows exactly what they mean to the person hearing them. What happened to my father's face in the moment after those words requires me to explain 2 things. The first is the mission. Eastern Afghanistan, 2014. A day that began as a support flight and became something else in the space of 14 minutes when communications broke down, and the situation on the ground changed faster than the initial intelligence had accounted for. 12 soldiers, pinned down, outnumbered. The window that existed for extraction was not the window that had been briefed, and the window that existed required a decision that the flight manual did not specifically address, and that I made in the time available, which was approximately 40 seconds. The official report, when it was declassified 3 years later, credited our crew with a role in the extraction of those soldiers. The language of official reports is institutional and compressed, and does not convey what 40 seconds of a particular kind of decision-making feels like, but the language is accurate as far as it goes. My father did not know about this mission because it had been classified, and because I did not talk about the things I did not talk about, and because he had not asked me about anything I had done in 11 years of service in a way that indicated he wanted an actual answer rather than a confirmation of a story he already had. The second thing is what Ryan found. He had proposed in my kitchen on a Tuesday evening while I was making pasta, and in the months between that proposal and our wedding, he had done what he does with things that matter to him. He had read everything: my service record, the commendations, the declassified report from 2014, which he had located through channels available to someone with his clearance history and his specific knowledge of how to find things that have been made findable. He had also found my father's service record, not through any improper means. Discharge records are public information information after a certain period, and my father's was public, and Ryan had looked at it because he looked at everything. What it showed was honorable service, stateside, support roles, an honorable discharge with no combat deployments, nothing shameful, nothing that should have required a different telling, but a very different telling from the one my father had been giving for 30 years. Ryan had not told me what he found. He had filed it in the category of things I know that are relevant to understanding the situation, and had carried it there, quietly, for months. When he held my father's wrist and said those 6 words, he was speaking to a man who understood exactly what the 2014 mission meant, not because Ryan explained it, but because Frank Calloway knew what classified records looked like, and knew what it meant when someone spoke about a classified event with the specificity of someone who had read the file. He understood that Ryan had seen everything, both files. The color left his face. His knees went. He went down. The paramedics arrived in 11 minutes. Ryan had gone to his knees beside my father immediately. No hesitation, no moment of satisfaction or withdrawal, just the direct movement toward a person who needed help, which is who Ryan is when things are stripped down to what they actually are. My father regained consciousness before the paramedics reached him. He lay on the reception floor of the Carnton estate and looked up at the ceiling with an expression I do not have precise language for. Not fear, not the fear that had moved through his face at Ryan's words, something past fear, something that lives on the other side of a wall you've been building for 30 years and have just watched come down in a room full of witnesses. Captain Holt was kneeling beside Ryan. He had moved there without being asked, with the specific practicality of a man who has been trained to move toward problems rather than away from them. He was monitoring my father's pulse with 2 fingers at his wrist and describing what he felt to the paramedic on the phone with the clinical precision of someone who has done this before. Detective Sergeant Alicia Monroe of the Williamson County Sheriff's Department arrived 12 minutes after the paramedics. She was 53, 17 years on the force, with the specific economy of movement of someone who has responded to situations for long enough that she has stopped performing authority and simply exercises it. She spoke to me on the porch of the estate while the paramedics worked inside. She took a statement. She was professional and direct and asked clear questions and gave me the space to answer them clearly. She asked if I wanted to file a charge. I had been thinking about this since the moment my father's hand connected, not consciously, in the way that trained people think about decisions, which is less like active thinking and more like a part of your mind running the calculation alongside whatever else is happening. Yes, I said. She nodded. She wrote it down. My friend and former fellow pilot, Captain Denise Nakamura, 8 years Army aviation, currently civilian, who had flown with me on my second deployment and who was one of the people I had most wanted at my wedding, had been standing near the door during the incident. She had footage on her phone. She gave it to Detective Monroe with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who understood what it would be needed for. The footage was clear. It showed everything in sequence, from the moment my father approached me to the moment Ryan's hand closed around his wrist to the moment my father went down. Clear enough that the question of what happened had a complete visual answer that did not depend on anyone's account. My mother found me on the porch while Detective Monroe was still there. She looked at my face, the cheek, which had developed the specific discoloration of something that had been struck and was now reporting the news, and she put her hand over her mouth and she cried with the specific sound of someone who has known something was coming for a long time and has been hoping it wouldn't, and has just lost that hope. Emily, she said. I know, Mom. I'm so sorry. I know. She was not apologizing for my father exactly, or not only for my father. She was apologizing for the years of the distance between what she had seen and what she had said, which is a larger apology and one that takes longer to work through than a single conversation on a porch. I held her hand for a while. Ryan found us 20 minutes later. He came out to the porch and stood beside me and looked at my cheek with the expression of a man who is cataloging damage and keeping his reaction to that cataloging internal, which is the professional version of what most people would call fury. How are you? He said. Standing, I said. That's enough, he said. We stood on the porch of the Carnton estate in the last of the October light, and he put his arm around my shoulders and I leaned into him slightly, which is not something I do in public generally, and which I did not examine at the time, but which I have thought about since. The specific permission of a day that has stripped everything down to what is true, which is that I was tired and my cheek hurt, and the man beside me had caught my father's wrist and said 6 words and then immediately, knelt down to help him, and I loved him for both of those things. My father was transported to Williamson Medical Center for evaluation. He had not had a cardiac event. The collapse had been vasovagal, the paramedic explained, which is the medical term for a fainting response triggered by acute emotional stress. He was conscious and stable and would be discharged the following morning. I did not go to the hospital that night. Ryan and I stayed at the estate until the last of our guests had gone. I was not going to let my father take the evening entirely, and I think most of the people who stayed understood this, because they stayed the way people stay when they have decided to be present for someone, not noisily, but simply by remaining. Captain Holt shook my hand before he left. He held it for a moment longer than a handshake requires. I've read about that day, he said, the 2014 extraction. I looked at him. Not all of it, he said. The public version. After it was declassified, he paused. I knew someone who was there. I nodded. Your husband, he said, knows what those medals mean. He does, I said. He released my hand. He nodded once, with the specific gravity of a man making an acknowledgement rather than a compliment. Then he left. The charge of domestic assault was filed the following week. My attorney, Janet Osei, 21 years in family and civil law, a woman who has the specific directness of someone who has been in enough rooms with enough difficult facts to understand that clarity is more useful than comfort, walked me through the process with the same professional attention she gave everything. The footage is complete, she said. The witness statements are consistent. This is a strong case. I know, I said. What outcome are you looking for? I thought about that question, about the specific range of outcomes available and what each one would mean, and whether any of them gave me what I was actually looking for, which I had been trying to name clearly since the night of the wedding. I want the record to exist, I said. I want there to be a document that says this happened. Janet nodded. She understood. The case resulted in a misdemeanor charge, a fine, and a mandatory counseling requirement, which my father accepted without contest. His attorney, a colleague of Janet's who she described to me as competent and currently quite uncomfortable with his client's situation, had apparently advised him that contesting the footage would not produce a better outcome. My father did not contact me during this process, except for one letter, handwritten, 3 pages, delivered through his attorney to mine. I will not reproduce it here because some things deserve to remain between the people they involve, even in a story that has required me to be specific about other things. I will say that the letter contained, for the first time in 32 years, the word sorry applied to me specifically and without qualification. I read it 3 times. I put it in a drawer. I have not responded yet. That is not a permanent state. It is a current one. 6 months later, Ryan and I live in a house in Clarksville that we bought in February that needs work in the back rooms and has a kitchen we both consider excellent and a back porch that faces east. I teach flight instruction 3 days a week. Ryan consults. We make dinner. We argue about coffee. He drinks it with too much cream, a position I find indefensible, a position he defends cheerfully. My mother visits once a month. We have been finding our way through the honest version of our relationship, which is different from the comfortable version and harder, and I think real in a way the comfortable version was not. She is doing that work because she has decided to do it, which is the only way it can be done. My father and I have not spoken.